You're listening to the McBride Experience. I'm Jake, joined by my co-hosts, Aaron and Jay, owners of McBride Custom Homes. We're taking you behind the scenes of custom homes, remodeling, cleaning, and property management in Northern Michigan. Let's get started. Well, then let's jump to the next area that I wanted to focus on, and that's kind of, budget and mistakes. The reality of doing this, does impact the final project, but also it can be easy to make mistakes, or, people have made mistakes in the past. So first, Jay, talking numbers, percentage wise, or just how much more expensive is it to build waterfront versus a similar project inland? Is it about the same, more or less? What are your thoughts?
It's usually between 20 to 40% increase.
Okay.
And then a lot of that is due to what we've been talking about, the permitting, the designing of this thing. A lot of times it takes a lot of extra steel work and stuff to go into these lake homes. Permitting, engineering, the site prep, all that is much, much more on these areas.
If you've got retaining walls, oftentimes the lakefront side of the house takes a beating from the wind and weather. So making sure you're insulating properly, selecting the appropriate windows,
right?
All those certain things are more critical that you choose wisely, and sometimes that cost.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense because the Great Lakes have, a lot of winter storms come through there, a lot of, summer storms. That makes a lot of sense. Are there any hidden costs people don't anticipate? Any specific examples that you could share?
I would say they feel like they can build a lakefront home in the same manner that they can build a home off the critical dune areas or non-lakefront homes. There's so much more engineering that goes into the home, planning for winds, structural loads. The way we have to design those houses is usually way more complex. So when we go about that, there is a cost to it, and that sometimes can be surprising how much cost that adds to those homes. But in reality, it's what they want in the end is that home on the lake with those views. But a lot of times they don't understand the cost that it takes to get them to that home that they dream of.
Right.
And to add to that, I would also say, cost isn't necessarily always monetary, right?
Sure.
There's an investment of time into making sure the environment is beautifully maintained. And so that's something that, yes, we plan really well at the beginning of a project, but even at the end, there's still great care that needs to go into making sure that the ecology there, there's no invasive species. So that might mean some follow-up visits with the proper authorities to say, hey, how are we looking? Is there any negative impact on the wetlands here? Or how can we continue to improve on what we have here and beautify it and make sure it's properly maintained? And so there's a hidden cost, if you will.
Yeah.
As far as that's concerned, you're dealing with something a little bit different, a little bit more sensitive than just, like you mentioned earlier, building in a field or something like that.
Right. Which is beautiful and it's by its own design. Right. But yeah, different costs. And I like that hidden cost. What about some of these homes that, you see on the lake? They look like, how in the world did they get there? Like they're just on like a bluff, or they're at this really unique overlook. What kind of hidden costs might go into just getting the construction equipment to a site like that?
Well, there's a lot of excavation costs. Sorry, cut you off, but a lot of excavation costs involved that. And as we know, that's big equipment, right? And every hour they're running costs hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So just to get a road into a house a lot of times can be, we've seen them over $100,000, because then you have to retain, even to get a road, had roads go down on a cliff and the house sits down on the bottom. So you have to retain that whole hill as you're building that road to go down to this piece of property that they're going to build the house on. So again, it just depends the complexity of the lot. And a lot of times people driving by do wonder, how did we get that house down there? Well, sometimes you have to have cranes come in, set steel, drive steel down.
Yeah.
Just to hold the banks back and make sure there's no erosion happening.
No, thanks for some specific numbers on that too, because I'm sure people wonder. Um, what are some mistakes that you have seen people make, or maybe some things to avoid? What assumptions can get them into trouble? What are some things that you want people to be thinking about so they don't get themselves into a tricky situation later?
Well, it's always, as the old adage goes, better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've dealt with situations where perhaps the client was a little bit optimistic that this would not be something we'd need to really lean into.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's our approach to side with let's be safe here. Let's make
Yeah.
sure we do our due diligence, because we also don't want any unforeseen consequence, whether it's during construction or even after they're moved in years down the road, they're dealing with a ecological issue. We don't want them to experience that either, nor do we want, nor do we want our great environment to be
Mm.
impacted adversely. So just making sure we do our due diligence, making sure we're not assuming, and we go through the proper channels.
And I would say that there's been over the years, a lot of people assume that they can build right on the water. And that's rarely, if ever, the case, right? There's always those setbacks that are in place. So you have to respect that and respect the natural environment. Like you had mentioned earlier, we live in a beautiful area and there's a reason that it's maintained that way. And we want to keep it that way. We don't want it to be a city and have all that going on in our area. We love the beauty here, and that's why people love to be here.
Yeah.
I'll add to that too, is it doesn't make me laugh, but a common frustration that we run into is they'll get this lot and they see where other homes are positioned in relation to the water and assume that that's what they also can be, or where they can be at. So, but those are likely grandfathered in. What what we've seen as far as their neighbors and where they built, it's sometimes surprising, but we got to go by the letter of the law, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's a little bit of a wake up call that, oh, I'm not allowed to be this close. There's regulations that we have to just follow. So it stinks when you have to be the bad guy and say, well, unfortunately, we're not able to build here, but here's what we can do.
Right.
We can still get you the end result, but we got to go about it a different way.
Well, I think that's also really important too, because water, the shorelines change, the water tables change. Some of those grandfathered homes might be dealing with damage or water issues that you're not aware of because you don't have access to them. So, 20 or 30 years from now, by putting that home in the right spot on the property, by following all the procedures, it's going to be there for generations to come and not run the risk of, falling into a lake. There was a crazy dune in Manistee County where some homes had fell into the lake because they were too close to the dune. Yeah, that's a bad way to lose an investment.
Well, and wasn't that long ago, we were designing and installing a pretty intricate stair system on a lake home on a cliff down to Lake Michigan, and we had noticed that one of the neighbors had just washed away. It was gone, and so they did not do their due diligence. They obviously did not plan it correctly, and I don't think they had the approvals that they needed. But and so that you can see the result. That's why you do that, to make sure, like you mentioned, it stands the test of time. It's always there. You're not seeing a staircase floating in Lake Michigan, or that's at the bottom.
Yeah, well, and nothing ruins your beach access than losing a staircase. So, no, that's very important. We've already mentioned that we can expect projects, to take a little bit longer. So, I think we're it's well understood that to have these beautiful views, and it does require a little more time and effort, but with careful planning, you get such a beautiful project. Let's just kind of shift gears again to, maybe some success stories. Aaron, do you have a favorite waterfront project that McBride has completed? Anything that made it special?
Well, that's a good question. I think they're all special in their own way, especially with. But I actually believe that. I do believe that because each each space has its own uniqueness as far as what the environment is gifting them with.
Mm,
It's not really a setback or a challenge. It's really a gift. It's just learning how to work with that. And so the end result is always it's a unique end result every time. So whether it's having to go up or out, or what the particular species are you're working with there, and the implications of that, you can actually utilize that to add to the beauty.
yeah.
But figuring that out is sometimes a little bit of a process, but it's so rewarding at the end of it, where you've got something that's a little bit now unique, a little bit even more special because of its setting and how it came together.
Nice.
Yeah, I think of having a boathouse on the water is pretty much you cannot do it anymore unless one is existing. So we've had a few of those projects, and it's just interesting to go through that process. And it's a pretty lengthy process because you have to go through townships and Eagle and several different permitting processes with neighbors and stuff to be able to recreate a boathouse that sits on the water. So we've successfully done a few of those, and the homeowners are elated with that because they don't want to lose that boathouse.
Right.
It's a beautiful part, and a lot of it's history. That
Hmm.
boathouse has been here. People driving the lake shore, they see that boathouse, they kind of know where they're at.
Yeah.
So recreating those memories, making that stand the test of time, and plus building over the water is a pretty difficult thing to do, and doing that successful within the regulations is pretty rewarding.
I'll give you one.
Okay, good. Good.
There was a particular house we were working on that had a lot of. It was on a cliff, and then there was the lake down below, and there was a lot of rock that we were able to tie into that. Obviously, extensive engineering went into it, but they were able to have a pretty cool cantilever deck that went over the cliff and enabled them to see just these, I mean, breathtaking views of the sunset on the lake. And they say they spend all their time, they go out there and they watch the sunsets, and in their chairs. And it's, after it was funny because after we finished the project for quite a while, I was receiving sunset pics. They were just so blown away at how it looked, and they just, it exceeded their expectations even, and they were excited about it when we were planning. But it was just really nice to see all that come together. It was nerve-wracking on my behalf because of the engineering,
Yeah.
but we made sure we did it correctly. It's a non-option there, but just nice to see them fully enjoying that space.
Well, I think that's an awesome example too of where creativity, like the constraints, probably helped you come up with another solution that maybe was even better than the initial one. So I think that's also important to state that sometimes the constraints actually open up the ability for these really unique scenarios like what you mentioned. So that's awesome. Are there any new technologies or approaches that you're seeing in waterfront construction? It's obviously it's always evolving, but what are you seeing? Anything, it's 2025. What sort of things are we seeing?
Technology is really helping, depending on what you're dealing with. But for water mitigation, there's a lot of technology with different sensors and things that can understand that and can help with the remediation process. As far as UV protection inside the house, we mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
technology in the sense of with the big windows, we see smart windows more and more. Even smart film is gaining traction as the technology is advancing.
Mm-hmm.
Those sorts of things, with three seasons rooms, heated boardwalks, different bunch of different things like that technology is starting to have some fun with. That also actually helps the environment as well.
Cool. Very cool. Um, what about climate change? I mean, you guys have been doing this for a while. Has that been a factor? Have you noticed a trend in change what have you seen, and how are things different than they were even 10 years ago?
Weather extremes, I would say.
Okay.
How do you deal with torrential rain, ice storms, snow? We've set records in snow around us.
Yeah.
Um, how do you design and maintain a home that has all these different elements going against it, and keeping a home with its integrity for the long haul? And that takes a lot of what we're talking about here with the strategies and things for wetlands, but that takes it to another level when you have all the different seasons we have that impact that. And the seasons have definitely gotten worse with the weather.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it's a little bit extra, it adds to the build cost. These insurances, you might so to speak, say that it's worth it. We don't get an ice storm every year, but we got one this year that really took us down. We didn't anticipate it. We've never seen that before, but like Jay's saying, that stuff happens. We get a lot of weather up here, all kinds of different weather. So making sure you're planned for it. Nobody wants to be in that situation where like, oh man, what do I do now?
Right.
So making sure we just build accordingly so that a plan is in place.
Well, and thank you for mentioning our weather stuff. Kind of set you up for that. But we will have a special episode all about our weather in northern Michigan and how we can build in such a way to still get the natural beauty from it, but also protect from some of those freak ice storms like we had this year. All right, well, let's kind of move into our wrap up here. Some key takeaways. So if anyone is listening to this and thinking about a waterfront project, and I'm going to ask both of you this question, what are the 3 most important things they need to understand going in? Jay, you first.
3 most important things would be start planning right out the gates before you try to do anything. Don't design your home before you meet with all the appropriate officials. 2, build those relationships with your contractor, your design team for success. That way they're in your corner trying to help you design around these restrictions you'll have on a lakefront home. And 3, enjoy the process, right? This is supposed to be fun. It might be intimidating to build on a lake, but this again is a dream to build on northern Michigan lakes. And that's maybe my opinion, but we've been a lot of places in this world, and northern Michigan has a particular beauty that just draws people in. And so that's the thing, just enjoy the build process.
Good. What about you, Aaron? What 3 takeaways you have?
I agree with Jay. I think first and foremost is planning, recognizing that when you're dealing with wetlands and other things like this that impact how you build, understanding that the process, the steps to building is a little bit different. So you need to rearrange your priorities. Landscaping, instead of going maybe towards the end of a build, needs to be at least a certain phases of it towards the beginning of it, for example. But making sure you plan correctly, like what Jay said, also the relationships with Eagle and other authorities, having watershed out there, tip of the mitt, seeing what possibilities there may be there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of what I would say is a second thing would be to embrace it, recognize you have something special and make sure you pull all of the special to be had out of that opportunity through your designing, through your planning, making sure that it's all, all your ducks in a row, and you'll end up with something truly special. And I guess thirdly, don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Make sure that you have the right people, on board with you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're dealing with a contractor that does not have experience in this regard, I would strongly caution that, because there's likely going to be some things he's not going to be aware of that will potentially cause some major setbacks. So making sure you have the right people in place, and lean into that and enjoy the process and the end result.
Good. So let's put on our future thinking hats here for a second. Where do you see this in the next 10 years going with waterfront, whether that's lake, river, or even just, the dune property? Where do you see that going in the next 10 years?
That's going to be even more restrictive, I feel. So getting used to this type of environment is key, especially for us. I mean, things change, but as we know with all regulations, they don't usually go backwards.
Right.
There's more regulations, right? And as we see these properties get less and less and less in northern Michigan, which there's very few lakefronts available,
Mm-hmm.
right, that are just an empty lot that are buildable sitting there. So a lot of it is caused, people are buying existing homes, and how do we stay within those setbacks? So that's the next phase, I feel.
Okay.
Is we have existing homes, but now how do we make these existing homes our dream home?
Yeah.
But keeping where we want to be on that setback. So we're starting into that phase.
Okay.
Right. Since the lots have become so scarce
Yeah.
in northern Michigan, now we're seeing that part of the phase happen. So it's going to be pretty exciting and unique to see how we navigate those waters.
Dang.
Yeah, I love a good challenge. I was reading on one of the ecological organizations' websites that their pledge for the next 5 years. I was reading that this morning, and they had mentioned that they really are focusing in on setbacks and the invasive species impact on building within those envelopes. So I see that as time progresses, they'll be really taking a closer eye on that, and it wouldn't surprise me if more regulations are to be had, more involvement with these organizations that are trying so hard, and we appreciate to preserve the beauty that we have. And so I see that, as Jay mentioned, tightening up a little bit.
And two, I want to mention that we support these, agencies. There's lots of agencies out there, and we're involved in many of them just because we think it is the right thing to do. And to be supporting these agencies that are helping protect our area, we want this to be long lasting. So, a shout out to those agencies that, we support, because without them, again, we wouldn't have this beautiful area that is maintained.
Nice. And that's a great way to kind of conclude this episode too, is it really is teamwork, all this for the beautification of the place and to keep it looking this way. Well, that's a wrap on our Waterfront Wisdom episode. Thank you again, Jay and Aaron, for breaking down. It's very complex, this world of lakefront construction. And for our listeners, remember, waterfront projects aren't just about building a home, but they really are about creating that legacy that respects both your dreams and Michigan's natural treasures.
Perfect.
Beep.
Yeah, that's
That's another McBride experience with Jake, Aaron, and Jay. Subscribe, share with friends, and send us your construction questions. This is where every home has a story and every story matters. Until next time.